Do you want to become an international spy, get involved with espionage, and take over the world? Well, then this video is not for you. Roll that intro. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions, both about dual citizens and dual citizenship. A lot of people seem to get some really interesting, odd ideas about both dual citizens and dual citizenship. And so this week, I wanted to jump into this topic. And something in the past that I found to be a bit more common than it is now, but I still hear it every once in a while, is that there seem to be a lot of people who are under the impression that you're going to have multiple citizenships, you're going to have multiple passports, you're going to be like James Bond, you can travel to one place, travel another, and then you're going to be able to become a spy. So that's the biggest thing first, is that by having multiple citizenships, actually, if you are interested in having any type of intelligence job, more than likely, and I'm not somebody who works for any type of intelligence, anything, so I'm not trying to represent or give any kind of legal advice here. This is not advice about life, liberty, the pursuit of anything. This is just about life as a dual citizen. But actually, from what I've heard, generally speaking, when it comes to being able to have any type of intelligence job, government job, whatever it may be, you may be limited in the security clearance that you will be able to get and what level you'll be able to reach. If you are somebody with multiple citizenships, multiple passports, your allegiance may be called into question and you may not be allowed to go past a certain point. And I have known a few different individuals over the years who wanted to pursue Italian dual citizenship by descent, but were concerned about what their government job might or might not allow for, or if they would lose their job if they got Italian citizenship. And if you are somebody who's working on sensitive materials, that's something that you may want to take into consideration as to how far you can grow within your field. And then even what I've heard regarding intelligence jobs anyways, like you having multiple passports, legal passports yourself, might actually not help you at all. And it might actually not even be the greatest thing anyway, because you're going to have your real name and real details on there. And if they're going to want to activate you, to send you into who knows where, then more than likely they will provide you with the documents necessary for such a job. We'll put it that way. Another odd thing that I've heard about from time to time is that there seem to be people who think that somebody who has multiple passports is only just going to commit crime and do things, and they're just going to run away from their country and go to the other when they have their other passport in their other country and blah, 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 whatever. And the thing is, if you, for example, are an American inside of the US, you're going to be treated as an American inside of the US. If you are a German inside of Germany, although their dual citizenship rules and regulations, that is actually a very different sort of set of rules and how that even works, but very fascinating. But different topic for a different day. But if you are a German citizen in Germany, then you will be treated as such. However, there could be a few situations where a dual citizen might experience a form of discrimination if they are also an American citizen. And this type of discrimination, not necessarily is social discrimination, but more so that, for example, if you are an American citizen and trying to bank in another country, you may find there would be certain countries that might not want to accept you to have a bank account there if you are also an American citizen. And it really comes down to more so the American side of things, not because of the bank itself. Like banks, of course, they're happy to have customers and clients, more the merrier, and that actually is a benefit to them. However, when it comes to Americans in certain places, there are some banks that just say it's too much work, that they don't want to have to deal with too much extra paperwork that is more than a headache than it's worthwhile. Another misconception that often is true is that some people think that if you are getting another citizenship, that you're automatically some type of traitor to your nation. Even there are a lot of older Americans who I've had contact with that thought having American citizenship only allowed you to have American citizenship and that you weren't allowed to get another one on top of it. There was a point in time where maybe that was true to an extent. However, having multiple passports doesn't inherently make you more tied to one place or another. Maybe it could for some people that they have an emotional tie to one, or that they have a little bit of a practical tie to the other. For example, living in the country of one of their passports, maybe they're more used to and accustomed to the way of life in a particular country. But at least in times of non-war, where you have citizenship to two countries that are not at war with each other, then of course this is going to be less of a concern. However, there could be be a situation where if your country has been declared an enemy of the other country, well, not your country, one of your countries has been declared an enemy of the other, or maybe you've sworn an allegiance, or maybe made some kind of oath or taken actions against one of your countries, then that could be a situation where you might face some problems. Of course, it's not legal advice of any kind, but treason is a real crime that does exist. But maybe also just to kind of take a little side note here, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that there are multiple ways of having dual citizenship, really two at the end of the day, that you are a citizen by descent or that you become a naturalized citizen of a country. Naturalization being that you become a citizen by choice, meaning that you go through a process to apply to become a new citizen of the country through, say, marriage or residency. Those are the most common. There's other different categories that you could get into, but we'll just keep it pretty simple and basic in this episode. And then there's citizenship by descent. So for example, if one of your parents came from a certain country, or in the case that maybe you're like me and you have Italian ancestry, that you can go back as many generations as possible as long as you have documented proof. And actually, in the case of Italian dual citizenship, it's not that you have to have it on you, that you can have research done on your behalf, or you can do research to get that documentary evidence. Because one thing that is a major misconception about citizenship in general is that if you take a DNA test and it says you're X% of whatever it may be, that you're going to be eligible for whatever that citizenship could be. I've never heard of a country accepting people that have citizenship through genetics. I mean, that's great that maybe you can relate to a certain people from a certain place in the world, and that you might be able to find commonalities with them, and maybe, who knows, even long lost relatives. However, when you're talking about a legal status, you need to also have legal proof to back that up. But just before we get into the next section, I did want to take a quick second to say thank you to those of you who helped to make this project possible on a monthly basis through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon or patreon.com/rafaeldifuria, as well as the thanks button and one-time donations. They all really help this project to be able to continue going. So really thank you all so very much. But to just jump into the next point, that a lot of individuals seem to be under the impression that dual citizens have divided allegiances. And while that could be possible for many people, it's not the case for everyone. It could be that somebody feels very proud of both nationalities, or more than both if they have multiple nationalities, of who they are, and it makes up what they are. Or it could just simply be a piece of paper and it doesn't really make a big difference for the person at the end of the day. However, that could be more so for the case of somebody who has citizenship by descent. When it comes to citizenship by naturalization, there might be a situation where you would have to swear allegiance to a monarchy, or to a constitution, or to something else that would be the requirement of that system, whatever it may be, because it's not just one country in the world that would allow or disallow, because not all countries allow their citizens to have multiple passports, multiple citizenships. Like I said, Germany has some interesting rules when it comes to that. I think it used to be a little bit more complicated in the past, and maybe it's opened up a little bit more now. But for example, I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, that Iranians are not necessarily allowed to have multiple citizenships, that they may have to give up one of theirs if they gain another citizenship. So that's something to consider, is that, not saying this again, not legal advice, but if you are pursuing citizenship of another nation, you may want to just double check that your country allows for that. Like, for example, generally speaking, the US really does have no problem with whatever kind of citizenship that you have. Italy, it's also similar. And in Brazil, it's funny. I forget exactly how it's worded, but I just remember reading it and it kind of struck me as funny. It was like, you're not allowed to have another nationality unless you happen to be born naturally with that citizenship, not naturalization, but citizenship by descent, or that you naturalize as an adult. And it was like, wait, aren't those really the only ways of getting citizenship? Although actually, this gets into another point, that maybe if you serve in the military of a country, that you could get a citizenship from that country. So that's a different kind of situation. And it is something that exists. But let's focus more on being born a citizen or gaining a citizenship through naturalization, more so through marriage and residency. Military service is going to be a little bit of a separate subject, because that theoretically actually could become an issue, that if you serve in the military of one nation and you're also the citizen of another nation, that maybe that other nation is not going to be so crazy about that, but it might depend on the relationships between the countries and how they all get together and if they have good relationship or not. So These are all things to take into consideration. Having multiple passports is something that really should be considered and thought about. I mean, a lot of you who I know are subscribed to this channel are subscribed because of information related to Italian dual citizenship, and you might be a US citizen or Canadian, US and Italy, or Canada and Italy. I mean, we're talking about some countries that they're chill with each other. So these are situations where you really won't have to worry so much. Again, not legal advice, but just in general, you probably won't have that concern that you might if you are a citizen of another country. These are just concerns that you might not have in that particular situation. But let's get into another misconception here about dual citizens, and that would be that they are all wealthy elites trying to take over the world to rule with an iron fist. That really is not the case at the end of the day. Okay, you may find individuals who do have multiple citizenships who are one of those heavy high-end earners who are buying, in air quotes, a citizenship and getting a golden visa of sorts and kind of having some sort of fast track through an investment or a purchase or whatever it may be. Generally speaking, I would argue that those type of dual citizens are in the minority, but generally speaking, a dual citizen is going to be an average person. You might not even know who they would be or how they would be, because it's just going to be a regular person walking down the street. There might not be anything really different about them at the end of the day at all. And also, to have dual citizenship, dual nationality, even if you are going to become a citizen of another country and get naturalized, okay, you may have some legal fees that you have to deal with. But of course, if you become a naturalized citizen of a country, you may want to have a lawyer around with you. There are, however, some people who do go through these processes on their own. And in many places, it is possible to do that. Of course, I would say it's usually a good idea, regardless of its citizenship by descent or by naturalization, having someone who understands the system and how to work through it is worthwhile having along with you. But the prices that we're going to talk about, generally, of course, they're not going to be necessarily the cheapest. However, there's going to be some sort of relativity to the general income of what most people would be earning in that country, that if you are hiring the services of a lawyer to begin with, that yeah, it's not going to be cheap, but of course that's what you expect when you are hiring a professional in a certain field. But maybe if it is a citizenship of a certain part of the world that the cost of living isn't as high as the country that you're in, then maybe, okay, for you, relatively speaking, the cost could actually be quite low. And the fees associated with submitting an application could be anywhere from maybe a few dollars all the way to a few $100s. But I would say for the average person looking at dual citizenship is that it is an investment. If you are pursuing it as an adult and that you didn't get it automatically as a child. So, I mean, there are certain citizenships as an adult that you can get that are citizenship by descent, by that you are technically retroactively a citizen since birth, like Italian, for example. Having access to another passport doesn't inherently mean that someone is rolling in it, so to speak. Because that leads also to another misconception that dual citizens are often going back and forth between their two countries. That's going to maybe be true for some individuals that they go back and forth, but for some others that maybe they're just going to stay in wherever it is that they happen to be. And maybe it's not going to be in either of their countries. Like, for example, I have both US and Italian citizenship, and I don't live in either one of those countries, because also having Italian citizenship gives me access to the European Union. And because it seems to usually come up as a question about why did I leave Italy and why am I in Portugal now? If you haven't seen episode 220, I recommend going to check that out. There's been a lot of assumptions why I left Italy. A lot of them are very wrong, but this is the thing. As an Italian citizen, I have access to other European countries, but this actually, again, leads into another misconception that is more specific to dual European nationals. Like, for example, if you have one passport that is one from one country and one passport from another, there's a lot of information that says that, oh, you can just move to another country. And while you have, as a European citizen, access and freedom of movement, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you inherently that you'll be able to legally live and reside in another country. There will be situations that if you are going to want to reside in a place, that you will have to make sure that you are financially able and have to document and prove your ability to survive on your own. I mean, I remember even hearing a number of years ago about Belgium. I believe it was Belgium. Maybe I'm wrong, so don't quote me here, but a European nation making it so that if a person was out of work for a certain period of time, that they would have to then go back to their country because this particular country didn't necessarily want to have so many people relying on their social system. A little bit of a different situation. But for me, being an Italian citizen living in Portugal, when I arrived here, I not only had to provide my Italian passport, but I also had to show documentation of my income and that I would be able to survive here. Because of course, at the end of the day, like, they don't want a person to come here and be a drain on the system. And I also don't want that. I want to be able to get by living here. So for as many passports as you may have, you will still have to play within the system's rules and figure out how immigration will work. There may be certain passports that will give you better access to certain parts of the world than others. I mean, whether it's the European Union or in South America, or who knows, there are different parts of the world that have easier access, and then also different passports based on the international relations between two countries. One passport may have better access to another country than another country might. And I prefer to not have to borrow a term from Nomad Capitalist, but your passport portfolio. I think it is worthwhile considering which passports that you have, or which single passport that you have, and what can help you to get to the next step, if that's what you're wanting to accomplish. Because depending on where you're wanting to be in the world, certain passports may help you in a certain way. So for example, just to compare and contrast a little bit here, not getting into the subject so heavily, that if you're from the US and you want to move to Portugal, for example, you might not necessarily have as easy of a time as somebody who might be from Brazil would have, but somebody from Brazil might not necessarily have as easy of a time to move to Portugal as someone maybe from Italy with an Italian passport. These are going to be things that you have to consider about what access you have to a place and how you can accomplish that. But for example, if you're an American who's wanting to live in Europe, then you're going to have other things to take into consideration as well. And that if you're maybe not choosy about which country you want to be in, that you're going to see about what kind of income requirement that you may have, or how you can get to the country, because maybe you have to have some type of sponsorship to get there and you have to have someone sign on your behalf, or that maybe you have to prove that you have X, Y, and Z tie with that country. These are all going to be various factors to take into consideration. And then another thing on top of that, if you're going to pursue citizenship by naturalization, then you want to take into account how many years do you have to reside in a country before you can finally become a citizen. And then in Portugal, it's 5, but I guess on a technicality, you could maybe call it 6. And then on top, there's a language requirement, of course. So in Italy, it's a B1, and in Portugal, it's an A2. So lower barrier to entry in both cases for somebody who is from outside of the European Union to be able to enter into Europe if they are looking at a European passport. And different countries will have different rules and regulations and requirements as to what will be the minimum that you need to be able to become a citizen. And then do you have to take a test? Do you have to take a cultural test? Do you have to take a language test? Or to begin with, are you even allowed to become a citizen of that country? There are going to be some countries in the world where you could live there for many, many years, but never be allowed to become a citizen, or have very restrictive rules that might make it very difficult for you to become one. But then in that same country, they may have some sort of permanent residency program that would allow you to remain there. But anyway, I'm really getting off topic here, away from the misconceptions that I wanted to get into in this episode. But I think this is going to be a great place to round out. So thank you all so much for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, the biggest thank you to those of you who helped to make this project possible through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria on the monthly basis, or the one-time donations, especially like the thanks button here on YouTube. That all really makes such a huge difference in my ability to be able to keep pushing forward with this project, as well as a huge thank you to those of you who like and share these videos with your friends. That really does help. And also to those of you who take part in the conversation down in the comment section below here on YouTube. It all does help the project, each in their own different way. So of course, as always, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you for joining me again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.